Hello and welcome to episode 231 of the Paint All the Minis Paint Ramble podcast. We put the show together so you can have something to listen to whilst you are sitting at your hobby desk and painting your miniatures of any scale, genre or game. Our aim is to have relaxed and genuine conversations with people who are involved in our hobby on any level, top to bottom, because we've all got our own stories and our stories are interesting. It's interesting just to sit at your little paint table while you're licking your paintbrushes and just listen to somebody else who's involved in the hobby and knowing that you're not alone in isolation. It's not just you. It's not just you at your desk on your own. It's all of us. There's loads of people. There's many different people that are involved in a hobby. And it's nice to hear all those different people and their stories. Sit at your hobby desk, paint your models and listen to the chat. We really do hope that you enjoy the content. And if you do enjoy the content, give us a shout. Give us a hello. Give us a little cooey from far away so we know that you're there and we can appreciate you. We can recognize your existence. In this episode, I speak to Mr. Alessio Cavatore, another guest who is completing his hat trick today. You may, if you choose to, go back and listen to episode 51 and then episode 142 before you get onto this one. So then you can have the full Alessio Cavatore picture. 3+ hours of Mr. Cavatore, which is always good. He's always insightful, always interesting. In this episode, we chat about how he handled the development and his feelings of Bolt Action 3rd edition. If you've been living under a rock, Bolt Action is a World War II tabletop alternate activation game, which is wildly popular. It's fantastic. It's one of the games that I really enjoyed to play. So we talk about his development of that 3rd edition, because when you take a game that's successful and then you're trying to change it, that could be good, could be bad. It's a little bit dangerous, possibly. So we talk about those things. We also talk about the Fight for America art concept that Alessio was involved in. And we also talk about the upcoming Ghost in the Shell RPG, which is due to come around next year. A little bit of extra on the Fight for America piece, because that was a really interesting one. You can go and research about it if you would like, but in a nutshell, it's an experience that people can play, get involved in. It's an opportunity that people have to role play the events of the Capitol riot of 2020 in Washington, D.C. I really think that Alessio was brave to get involved in this, and it shows his independence, it shows his bravery, as I just mentioned, and also his open-mindedness to champion an idea such as this. And I think it's an interesting project that will have people forming opinions and ideas. Check out the website, www.fightforamerica, all one word, .games. So www.fightforamerica.games, where you can find out more. It's been really interesting for me. I hadn't heard about it until I started doing a little bit of background research for this episode. I'd not really heard of the Fight for America thing. So it's been really interesting to see how different people have responded to it already. And there's a mix of positive and negative stuff. But the negative stuff that I've encountered generally comes from misinterpreting what the aims are. People are taking the idea and starting to change it and morph it into something that they think it should be. That pops up in the show, even just with a word, and Alessio rightly pulls me up for it. I mentioned the word insurrection, and then he correctly just says that is saying the word insurrection is a bias, and that's an opinion, and that's really cool. And that didn't necessarily come from me believing that it was insurrection. It came from me reading an article about it and another article about it that mentioned the 2020 insurrection. So if nothing else, that came up in the show, and that was really interesting, because that's not how the Fight for America people frame it. That was how two separate people had framed it according to their ideas and their biases. Not that I'm saying that it wasn't, but I don't know, it's just crazy interesting. I could kind of chase, like a dog chasing his tail, I kind of go around a lot in that. So it's really interesting to kind of go to the website, the www.fightforamerica.games, where you can go and see what their intent is. You can hear it straight from the horse's mouth. And before we get triggered, we can kind of go and look at that website, because we're all pretty level-headed at Paint All the Minis anyway. I'm sure you'll be able to look at it in a level-headed way if you want to, or equally just not care. But I just think it's a really interesting concept. And I think it's awesome that Alessio was involved in it. It would be easy to kind of duck that and sidestep that and sort of say, hey, I don't want to get involved in that. People might get a bit grumpy. But I think the idea that the people are putting together, I think is really, really good. And that comes up in this show. So I'm not going to talk about any more. You can go and have a look at that if you so desire. That's enough of the pre-ramble ramble. I hope you guys are all okay. You can come and check out the Facebook group. You can come and have a sniff around the Discord. There's a link in the description of the podcast, which never expires. So you can come and hang out. You can show us what you're painting, because that's what it's all about. We want to know what you're doing. Like I said before, we want to recognize your existence. We want to bring you into the family, so you can have a little sit down. We can pat the seat next to us, and you can come and sit down, and you can paint some minis and show us what you're doing and tell us what you're up to. That's enough of the P-Ramble Ramble. Let's go.
Paint all the minis. Paint all the minis that you can. And when you paint your minis, listen to that podcast with Dan Adams, that is.
This is Seamus. I'm a wargamer, like you. Not too long ago, I too had an enormous backlog of unassembled and unpainted miniatures, and I struggled with what to do about them. But then I discovered Paint All the Minis. The podcast, the website, the Facebook group, everything about it geared towards making me a better hobbyist. I can paint faster with better detail, stronger shading, stronger highlights. Everything is just better because of Paint All the Minis.
Allora, salve! Mi chiamo Dan e tu chiami Alessio Cavatore, vero?
This I was not expecting. Sì, mi chiamo Alessio Cavatore, sì.
Ok, e tu vivi in Inghilterra, vero?
Yes, I live in England. Vivo in Inghilterra, sì, da tanti anni.
And io vivo in Cina con il mio famiglia.
Wow.
So there you go.
Your Italian is impressive.
Thank you. Yeah, I did tell you I've been practicing. I kind of kept that on. I was really nervous about doing that because we mentioned in pre-show.
Wow.
Obviously, people won't know, so I'll mention that. We talked about in pre-show how I've been learning Italian. So is that okay? You understand what I said?
Yes. Not 100% correct, but close to, I would say, 90% correct. So
okay.
Wow, impressive. Yeah.
Nice.
Wow.
There you go.
Yes, you can tell you're a foreigner because, for example, you said il mio famiglia. Basically, you started with the masculine, and then you ended familia, which is feminine. So you're kind of you got the gender of the word family wrong, which is obviously makes no sense. Then in Italian, things like a chair have a gender. It's just like what? Why?
Yeah.
Nobody knows. Nobody knows why.
So it will be io vivo in Cina con la mia famiglia. Is that better?
Esatto, la mia famiglia, not il mio famiglia. Yes. It's like doing a lesson here.
Yeah, for sure. So I bring that up as a kind of little bit of an icebreaker. So as an Italian living in the UK, you've had a similar experience, and I don't think I asked you this last time that we met, but you went to GW to act as a translator. But how was that experience for you in terms of learning English? Is it something that you'd done in school that you had a little bit of a grasp of, or was it something that was completely new?
My English comes from school, but school languages are never exceptionally good. So I did I always did English as a foreign language throughout all my education in Italy. But I think where I learned English is through, to begin with, D&D. There was probably the first thing, and then Tolkien, because I wanted to read a Lord of the Rings in English. After reading it several times in Italian, I was like, but I want to read it in English. So I think it was D&D, because at the time, actually advanced D&D, AD&D, all the big volumes, all the big books were all in English. There was no Italian edition, no Italian translation. And Warhammer, all of these games were all in English. Either you read them in English or you didn't read them. There was no Italian alternative. Sure. So I learned it through, first games, D&D, Warhammer, and then literature, Tolkien, and so there was a lot of that. And funny enough, when I then moved to England to be a translator, I was speaking a little bit like a an ancient. Well, my English was old-fashioned, Tolkien-esque.
Yeah, okay.
It was quite hilarious. I keep referring to people as queer, by which I meant different, weird. Because
Yes.
the Shire, the Hobbits would say the queer folk from outside the Shire.
Nice.
And people are like, I think you find that word a slightly different meaning these days.
That's really interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So if anyone is listening that is also learning Italian, going the opposite way that you did, you obviously read Lord of the Rings. Is there a recommendation of things that we can do, things that we can listen to, things that we can read that might help people learning Italian in the way that you learned English?
Well, I think one thing that helps, of course, is watching Italian television with subtitles. If you put Italian subtitles on and watch the program, if you have some knowledge of Italian, hearing the spoken language while you read what they're saying is actually quite useful, I thought. Same for my English, really. And I guess that the risk is that there's a lot of dialect spoken in Italy. So if you find the right... the wrong show, then you're kind of going, what?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I remember recommending watching Montalbano, Commissar Montalbano, to somebody, and then they were coming up with these words, and I was like, actually, that's not Italian, standard Italian. That is Sicilian, actually. So sometimes you get these dialects coming into things, and it gets a bit confusing. But yeah, that, and I mean, if you want to read books, I think comics are good.
Yeah,
there's a lot of cool comics. I don't know, Zero Calcare, and again, Zero Calcare sounds very Rome in the way when he speaks, but watch out for the dialect. But comics, books. Italo Calvino is a great writer that I think is amazing writer. So
right, well, there you go. That's something I can go away and think about, and something that I can look at. Thank you for that. I really appreciate it, and thank you for correcting my grammar as well. It's already worthwhile, this conversation. But anyway, let's start talking about the hobby then. So this is the third time you've been on the show. I mentioned it in the introduction. You kind of been on 2 times previously, so thank you again for coming onto the show. We really appreciate it. Obviously, it's not too much of a hassle, not too much of a chore, and but it's been a long time since we spoke. So we know that you are the man behind River Horse, and there's different projects that you not only lead yourself, but you also act as a kind of a consultant of sorts for other people that are creating games, and you act as like a kind of springboard for companies that are making their own games, but also a sounding board maybe for other people that are creating the rule set. So if we kind of take maybe the start of 2022 as a kind of hard historical backstop, like what have you been doing over the last few years that maybe we might know, or maybe that we don't know about, in terms of games and rule structures?
Funny, because you say 2022, so my first reaction was to go to my page on Facebook, the Alessio Cavatore game designer page, just to check what I actually did in 2022, because clearly I don't remember. But I conveniently put there a gallery of products, which is like all the products I ever worked on both as a lead writer, as an assistant writer, as an assistant developer, and they're dated. So I'm just going to go right there, right now, and find out in the photo section.
But as you're talking about that, that's a great resource, and the fact that you've got this Facebook page that people can go and click on, and they can kind of follow along with that story. And I know that you've talked about previously, when we talked about what makes a good game, that you're very receptive to people reaching out and sending an email or maybe sending a message about advice and feedback. All right, does that still stand true?
Well, as long as they're polite, yes. Because basically, I'm getting a little, I would say, over sensitive, I guess, to the internet, and the feedback on the internet is often quite hateful. And so these days I'm kind of shy away a bit more from the internet, because I find it a bit, I don't know, maybe it's a mental health thing.
I get it. I understand that completely, and that's something that I've done. I've taken a break for probably 1.5 years, 2 years. I took a complete break out of social media just because similar things. There was certain things that were kind of eroding my energy, certain interactions with certain people. I would say probably every single day that I kind of wake up and I go to work, I have a certain amount of energy, or I call it coins quite often. And every social interaction that I have, it costs me a certain amount of my energy, or it costs me a certain amount of coins. And some interactions give me more coins back, and probably most 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 individual kind of interactions actually cost me coins, and at some point during the day, I'm never really sure when it is. It depends on when the day and how the day is going, but at some point I just kind of run out of energy. So yeah, I kind of really I can empathize with that, and I've got a huge amount of compassion for that, and it's such a shame that that's the case. And I don't know if there's a solution for it, but all you can do is, like you say, is just kind of weigh up those interactions and sometimes decide not to interact.
What I find that works is deploying filters, as in I'm lucky enough that often, because particularly now that I work mostly as a consultant, I work for companies that have people whose job is to interact with the community, and I normally tend to get those people to read the raw material, so to speak, the raw feedback, and just give me a filtered version and saying, most of people are saying they like this bit, most of people say they don't like this bit, most people, so they kind of give me the summary, if you want, of the feedback, so that I don't have to interact directly, because very often direct interaction is a bit painful.
Sure.
And on the other end is immensely positive when it's constructive. So I try as much as possible to read things, but I'm a little scared of the internet.
For sure.
Yes, I mean 2022. I'm just looking at things, and there's been a massive change just last year in 2024, which you're not aware of. So in 2024, I was still running Riverhorse, which basically, like you said, is mostly doing our own games, but also doing services for other companies. But in 2024, I actually managed to sell Riverhorse. So I actually managed to unload a lot of the responsibility of that, and just stick to being a consultant, a freelance, working for other people, without the burden of the business, of running the business, without the worries, the commercial worries, etc. I mean, those things still exist, but because it's not my little company, and I don't have staff, I don't have to worry about the livelihood of the people that work for me.
Yes,
it's just like all that is out of my head, and that has been fantastic. Best thing I've ever done.
Is that mostly because you can spend the time doing the things that you really love and why you got into this, without necessarily being concerned about balance sheets and different things in the background which take you away from that creative process? Would that be correct?
Absolutely, 100%. That is that I don't have I can focus on doing the things that I enjoy, and frankly that I think I'm better at, rather than running a business, which is writing games. Writing games and writing RPGs, board games, war games, all this kind of stuff, and I'm doing a lot of it. I thought I was going, I'm gonna probably kind of half retire, really take it easy, but unfortunately, or fortunately, it depends upon you, there was instantly you have more time now. Here's some more projects. I was like, okay then. Well, I just can't say no.
Yeah, for sure, which is nice though, and it's nice. It kind of gives you a different outlet and a different direction to travel in, and that's really nice to hear. So, talk to us about something that you've enjoyed then.
Well, obviously the biggest thing, the thing that's taken a lot of time and resources and energies, and has been released recently and is doing really well, is Bolt Action 3rd Edition. That was, if you're saying 2023, that's mostly what I was doing in 2023. I was, playtesting, developing Bolt Action 3rd Edition. That was the most of my time, I would think, while at the same time Riverhorse was doing services for Draco Games, the Mexican company that did a lot of different games, and internally we released a little board game called Noli, which is based on a little Italian town, fishing town. But so I think Bolt Action was definitely the biggest project. Definitely.
So let's spend some time talking about that then, because I mean I'm a layman in terms of this, so you know significantly more than me. But what I'd presume from the outside looking in is that'd be quite difficult in some ways, because you were heavily involved in Bolt Action previously, heavy involved, a lot of the army books, rule books, and there's a lot of you in there already. So when it came round to a 3rd edition, how does that work in terms of what do you keep? What do you change? What do you adjust? What was the food that you were consuming in terms of this needs to be included, or I'm going to refuse this? How did that process go from something that was good anyway, something that was very successful anyway, into a third edition? How did you decide what to keep and what to potentially change?
Yeah, you said a few very true things. Bolt Action Second Edition was doing well. It was a great game, but wasn't anything that people felt was broken. And so it's you feel like, well, if it ain't broke, why fix it, right? Or why do we need to do anything? And the reason for that, it didn't come from a game design point of view. It came from a Warlord Games commercial point of view that basically said we would like to refresh the system, relaunch. We want to change the way people collect their armies, particularly because the range had grown hugely since the start of Second Edition. I mean, and Bolt Action Second Edition was how many years? It was quite a long time. I'm just checking again. I'm going to my photos on Facebook.
I'd say 10. We're 10. Probably knocking on for that. I mean, I can't.
Well, the first edition was 2010. Yeah. Second edition. First edition 2012 for first edition. I see second edition here 2016.
Okay.
So
8 years.
Second edition 2016. So 2023-24 release. Yeah. So a huge amount of time, which obviously is the proof that the game was okay. Yeah. There was nothing wrong with it. But yeah, so new thing, refresh, reignite passion for people that maybe started to go, I would like something new, something different.
Yeah, for sure.
And refresh the way people pick armies. The main driver was to basically change the Bolt Action used what you call up to second edition a reinforced platoon as the core way of picking an army, which was mostly infantry, weapon teams with some artillery and vehicles thrown in, but it was a very abstract concept. Well, actually, the new edition of Bolt Action Third Edition goes a bit more historical. At least gives you a bit more of the vibe of a historical, or rather a realistic army, whereby you have rifle platoons, heavy weapon platoons, artillery batteries, vehicle platoons. So you're picking a selection of these and you mix them inside a force. The rifle platoon is still the core. You still need at least a rifle platoon to start with, but so the way you collect the armies is different. The game itself has been simplified intentionally with the intent of making it more accessible to younger players, to people that are not super keen hardcore war gamers. So kind of in the view of recruiting more, opening it up a bit. So and as you reminded me, the philosophy of getting complexity or sophistication through simplicity, which is kind of like the mantra I always try to do, is simplifying the rules doesn't mean simplifying the game. The game can be even more interesting and involved with even simpler rules. In fact, I think it's probably the simpler the rules, the more time you have to think about the game.
Exactly. And that's something that we spoke about years ago. It made so much of an impact on me because I still remember it to this day. You said that you want players who play your games to spend more time making interesting decisions about what to do instead of thinking or looking through a rule book and seeing, well, how many dice do these guys roll? What can they do? What can they do here? You wanted a little bit like a chess game where you're looking at a chessboard and seeing what's the best move for me right now, what is the best unit to activate right now, as opposed to just thinking what are the rules for these individuals. And I really appreciate that, and it's something that really sticks with me, so thank you for that.
Well, thank you for remembering it. I mean, I had a clear demonstration of that in a tournament I played last week in England. I was in a Bolt Action tournament, and my opponent, in the very last turn of the 6 turns game, did a very clever thing. Instead of going for an objective that I thought he was going for, he kind of blinded me completely and went for a different objective, which I thought he couldn't reach, but he could. And so we had a final assault on the very last objective, and the assault went down to the last man standing. Nice. Literally, there was one of his guys left, none of mine, and so he won because of that. And it was great because it was about a sudden move, an unexpected move, which he timed correctly towards the end of the turn, where I had activated most of my units, so I couldn't respond to it. So I only tried a desperate maneuver, which was kind of doomed to fail, but you never know. And so no, it was very exciting. Ended up, very much on a razor edge. It was great.
So how much of an open brief did you have? Because being a consultant, being somebody who's kind of tasked by a company to come in and look at a rule set, did they say, hey, just go crazy, do what you want? Did they have set things? How free were you? And also, how do you like to work? Do you like the open brief, or do you like being given some set ideas?
I normally, the first phase, every time somebody commissions some work to me, the first thing I'll do is a briefing stage. So a period where I would ask them a million questions. Like a Socratic moment when I go, right, what do you want? Do you have a clear idea of what you want? And we both need to have a clear idea and agree on what we want on this. So there would be a period of lots and lots and lots of questions. If it's a new game, I would go, so how many players, how many pieces, how long should the game be? Is it competitive, cooperative? What dice does it use? Does it need some gizmos as well? So there's a lot of commercial and game design things that come together to form a brief of what the product is going to be. So in the case of Bolt Action 3, it was, as I said, the steer from Warlord was, we need to change the army selection, the process on which people pick armies. From my point of view was, I think this game could be simpler, because I was finding that in tournaments, particularly where I try to go quite regularly because it keeps me up to date, up to speed with the community. There was, when you play, but even both in friendly games and in tournament games, people tended to forget some of the modifiers when they were calculating what they needed to hit. And I was like, well, surely that's too much math. This is not enough. So I just went up, remove a lot of the math, make it so much simpler on that level. And to do that, I introduced like a cover save to absorb some of the math into a dice roll, which it was interesting because I'm sure that people that were more into control by adding an extra random element in there so that the game was slightly more chaotic, even though you can modify it and there's things you can do about it. But it was interesting, that change, and I was afraid of that change because, again, when you start tinkering with something that is good, Bolt Action 2 is good, and you're afraid of breaking or killing the golden egg goose, right? You're kind of going, oh god, like if I break this game, it will have consequences. That people will lose their jobs, and it's going to be horrible. So there is a degree of concern for the impact of what you're doing. But so that's why you go for the brief carefully. You make the decisions. You test them with people you trust. In this case, I will speak with people like Rick Priestley. Rick is a director of Warlord, even though now he's kind of half retired. But we're friends. We still play games together, and it was amazing to be able to speak with him and discuss my theories with him, with John Stallard, with Paul Sawyer. So people that have different views on the hobby. While one is more game oriented, one is more about history, one is a bit more about the hobby, collecting and miniatures. So I check with all these stakeholders, all the most important stakeholders, and once I have the kind of a consensus with the important, from the big cheese, big cheeses of Warlord, then I go, right, okay, seems to be my understanding of what they want. They seem to agree that that's what they want, so let's try to deliver what they want. And from my point of view, there's an element of me trying to make the game more pleasant because I play the game. I want to enjoy the game even more. So hence take away complexity.
Was there anything during that process that you had to fight hard for that you were quite proud about, that maybe you had to kind of change people's opinions or really kind of say, no, I really think this is important, or was it all plain sailing?
Well, not so much from the Warlord point of view, but certainly from the playtesters' point of view, because we have this external playtest group, kind of a secret group of playtesters, and there was a lot of pushback, for example, on the cover saves, because again, a lot of the guys were tournament players, and obviously that takes away a little bit of control, so they were not in favor, and it's because these are keen people that play the game a lot and know the game, sometimes better than me.
Yes.
They're really super sharp in their game. And there's a part of you that thinks, oh, should I? Maybe I don't need to do this, even though my designer instinct says no. I think it's a better game. When I play it with that change, I think it's better. I prefer it, and a lot of people, maybe they're not super keen tournament players, prefer it like that. But it's difficult to resist when the pressure from people that are so keen and so competent, if you want. So that was difficult, and sometimes I had to stick to my guns and hope that I was right. But the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive, which is I'm really, really pleased and relieved. The number of people that said the right thing, which for me is, I didn't like these changes when I heard about them on paper and on the internet, but then I played the game. And actually, after playing the game, I think they're amazing. It's great. It's good. It's faster than before. It's simpler than before. So hearing the people disagreed with on paper, but then tried it in reality and actually like it is great. And there's quite a few that are saying that, which is nice. It's nice to hear.
And it's an important thing to note is that obviously it's maybe slightly different if you are a competitive tournament player, but you don't necessarily have to graduate to the 3rd edition, right? If you really enjoy the 2nd edition, you could just stay there if you wanted to. And we see that with a lot of games, especially games that have maybe not coming out with new editions and not being supported by their parent companies anymore. You could just stick in a different edition, right?
Yes, funnily enough, a few months ago I played in a Warhammer 6th edition.
There you go, yeah.
Which was a blast from the past. It was amazing. It was really funny.
Yeah, for sure. So is there anything in Bolt Action 3rd edition that you're particularly proud of?
I think the sticking to my guns and actually getting to a game where the game is faster than before and smoother than before, and seeing so many young people some new people getting into the game, it's really refreshing. It's really nice. So I suppose the changes seems to have worked, which is something that I'm proud of. Yes.
Yeah, you mentioned jokingly about like the pressure that you felt. Is that something that's just your own personal professionalism, or is that something that's external? And did it affect you? Are you just throwing it out there as a bit of a joke, or does it really weigh on you?
Well, as a character, I tend to be a warrior as opposed to a warrior. I worry a lot about things, and I always think of worst case scenarios. And oh my God, what if I destroy Bolt Action? Oh my God. But again, there were people there that helped me in that moment of insecurity and said, "No, look, you're competent, you're good. Look at your track record." I think every writer, when you write a book, you always doubt yourself. So you always think, oh God, is this any good? Would anybody ever enjoy this? So you have that. In any creative process, there's an element of fear and insecurity and hesitation. And luckily, experience teaches you that no, I think I know what I'm doing. Looking at the record, so trust yourself, trust your guts. Yeah, trusting your guts is important. Is another thing that the older I get, the more I kind of learn that life teaches me that your guts are most often right. Trust your guts.
Well, I can't remember the name of the philosopher. I think it's a guy called Alan Watts, and he talks about Taoism quite a lot. Like Taoism is a kind of like Buddhism, but based in the kind of Chinese culture. And he talks about that a lot. He talks about how life or decisions is a little bit like, or life is a little bit like a fish cooking in a frying pan. It's like you need to cook the fish, you need to apply heat for sure, and you need to turn the fish over. But the more you poke and prod, the meat might begin to fall apart, and the meat loses its really nice flavor because you messed around with it too much. And it kind of fits in with what you're saying there. And yeah, it's really great to hear you speak so openly about that. There's, you got somebody who's incredibly experienced, created a lot of amazing games that a lot of us still play and are aware of, that is still a human being like that. It's great to see that you're so open with that. And it's a double-edged sword, I think, isn't it? It's that's what makes you really good at what you do. The fact that you are thinking about these implications, you're thinking about the outcomes. And again, just to quote a different person, I think it was Lord Wellington said that all life is about guessing what's on the other side of the hill. So I guess that's maybe the same with bolt action game design, is that you're trying to think and guess what's on the other side of the hill, which is like when Bolt Action 3 releases, right?
Yes, interesting. You quote Wellington and Waterloo. I often quote Napoleon, actually. So I'll see your Wellington quote and I'll meet it with my Napoleon quote, where he says that we always tend to see kind of malice in things like, oh, they're changing this thing because they want to, and there's a lot of negativity on the internet. And I kind of go, there's a Napoleonic quote that he says, never ascribe to malice what can be explained with incompetence. the idea that you always think, oh, the enemy is making a mistake, or there's a plan, they have a master plan, because this cannot be a mistake, right? They must have thought of it. Well, actually, no, they're just being incompetent. They just made a mistake. Don't overthink it. So
that's really cool, man. So Bolt Action 3rd edition. So that's a very old companion for you now, right? Bolt Action. So as you kind of think about from when you first started getting involved in it to now, like what's your overall general thoughts of that game system?
Well, I think it's got an interesting simplicity to it in general, and it's obviously, I guess, an advantage in the fact that you're not dealing with aliens and super soldiers with futuristic weapons, and so there is a degree of constraint there, as in you cannot make up stuff, but there's also a beautiful simplicity with it's about men with rifles at its core, real people. So there is I was teaching recently. I met a very nice guy who is a keen 40k player, and he said he heard about Bolt Action and he wanted to try it. And I said, well, okay, come over into the office and we'll play a game. And so I played a game with him. He never played it before, and it was fascinating. It was fascinating to see how his brain had to learn to think in a completely different way, because going from a I go, you go big battle system like that with lots of variables, lots of different air races, and where the variables are bigger, to a thing where actually one is that activation with the dice system, which is, I think, it's the beauty of the game. It is the best thing in the game. And and the guy was like seeing his brain struggling with it at the beginning, and then it clicked on, because the guy is sharp, clever, tournament competitive player, and by the end of a couple of turns, he was actually starting to play really well. When he understood, it's like, oh, okay, so it's about target priority. So this thing is really scary, but this turn is already gone, so I don't need to react to that right now. What is the next scary thing that has not activated yet? So it's that, and then suppression, of course. This thing is more likely to activate than this thing, so maybe I should put more pinning on. I should put more fire onto this thing to try to stop it from activating. All those little elements, which are simple rules, but it makes it quite an interesting tapestry of decisions.
Yeah, you've hit onto two of the things that I really enjoy. I really enjoy the dice mechanic. I really enjoy that when you pull a dice, what do I need to do now? What can wait? That's always a really good decision, like just where I'm going to put that dice, where I'm going to put it down. Yeah, and that's the other mention about target priority. It's like, because sometimes people just want to do the big thing with their flashy unit, but it's about timing. It's about doing the right thing at the right time. And there's times where I've waited, I'm going, I really want to do this thing with this unit, and then I miss my opportunity because the thing that I wanted to do, the unit that I wanted to hit, or whatever it was, moves and it's gone. So timing is really important. But then also about pinning, which I think is really important for, I wouldn't say it's a more realistic feel in the game, although it is that quite often it's not a lot about killing stuff. It's just about making stuff worried about its safety, and it's like, I don't need to kill that unit. I don't need to actually get any of them. I just need to get them to keep their heads down. So yeah, that's really cool. Can you remember the genesis of this? Can you remember when you first started being involved and thinking about this stuff? And especially in 3rd edition, you probably thought about that for a second. Is that something that was just completely untouchable? Pinning was untouchable. Dice mechanic is untouchable.
Well, the activation dice is definitely untouchable, in the sense that is Bolt Action, is the definition of the game, right? The order dice and the bag, that's what it defines it. So not that, but certainly we tinkered a bit with the pinning, because with the new edition you hit more often, so there's more pins appearing. Therefore, we had to make make sure that people could get rid of the pinning a bit more easier than before.
Yes.
So we made rallying more effective and stuff like that. So there was a balancing of the pinning mechanic. But how was it born? Well, that was distant 2010, 11, something like that, where again that briefing process I described was very much about one of the points of the brief at the start was that Warlord Games wanted, and by Warlord Games I mean John Staller, Paul Sawyer, Rick Priestley, wanted the game to have something that an item, a gizmo, a token, something that was tangible and would have become effectively the byword for the game. Would have been you clearly identify the game by this one thing. And so I thought long and hard about what the one thing was, and we tried bases, we tried rulers, we tried different things, and eventually I was like, about this dice that actually has both the name of the action of the order you're giving to the unit and used as a marker for the unit activation. So we tried to it was also randomizing which unit activates. So it does a lot of work, that little one dice, which has become the iconic, the order dice. So that was the creative moment when I go, how about that? And that seemed to have gone well.
in my job, I talk quite a lot about the difference between creativity and innovation. And if we are creative, we are making something that maybe hasn't existed before, whereas innovation is more of you take something as an idea or a concept and you develop it further. So have you seen that idea of the bolt action activation dice? Have you seen it evolved? Have you seen it used in other places? And if you have, how do you feel about that?
Well, it has been used in other Warlord Games game systems because obviously is proprietary of Warlord Games. I know that other companies have considered changing their games to use that, and in some cases decided not to because again there was the is this don't want to be the same as other companies. But I mean, to be honest, what you were saying about innovation versus creativity, again, my experience tells me that it's very, very, very rare in any creative art to find something that is completely new in the sense has never been used before. I always find that there's always a rearranging of elements, that maybe a rearranging in a different way of elements, which is the new thing. Because I mean, drawing chits to activate things is definitely not started with bolt action. I mean, that was a thing, as old as time, as old as games. The funny thing is always when I am convinced I have this new revolutionary idea that has never been tried in a game, I always, sometimes speak to Rick Priestley about it, and he goes, no, that was used in 1973 in this game here, blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh.
But if you think about it in seclusion, if you do genuinely think about it in a seclusion, or maybe even it's just like a subconscious thing in the background, you still thought of it, you still came up with it, right? But just someone else came up with it, not necessarily before you, but someone came up with it at a different time, right?
It's where I learned about parallel development, because I remember very clearly a very embarrassing moment when I was designing a game for Fantasy Flight, actually, Fantasy Flight Games, and I thought I had this great mechanic, which was completely unheard of, very new, and I put it in the game. And then, months later, somebody shows me another game which has the very same mechanic, which I never knew, I didn't even know the game existed. So obviously, it's very clear that people would think, oh, he just copied that game or that. I was like, I didn't know the game existed. And that's I looked into parallel development, and it's very interesting in terms of even scientific. Most commonly, scientific research is where two labs, one in China, one in the US, one in UK, or whatever, comes up with a formula, a new medicine, a new chemical, something that is completely new, and they both come up with it roughly at the same time. And it was the secrecy, maybe a few months. So they all think is espionage. It's like, oh my god, you have a mole, is espionage. You're stealing our ideas. How did you get into our security and stuff? Well, actually, in many cases, I'm sure there's some cases it is espionage, but in some other cases, in most cases, from what I hear, is parallel development in the sense that if you present the same problem and the same data to the human brain, it's very likely that at some point the brains will come to the same conclusion.
Yeah.
So, presented with the same variables, the same information, and the same question, most people will come to that same answer. So that happens. So in this case, it was a rule mechanic. But it could be science. It could be.
It's super interesting, and so I liken any creativity process to, if they're kind of the similar things. If I think about like writing a song or being part of a band that writes and performs their own music, there's quite often some riffs here, and then there's some lyrics over here, and then there's some like chord progressions over there, and sometimes those lyrics can sit dormant for a number of months or years, and the guitar riff can sit there for a number of years. Is that kind of the same with you? Do you kind of like have a bunch of potential possible mechanics in like a toolbox in your brain somewhere, and then when you get tasked and when you're consulted for a new game, do you kind of rustle around in that toolbox and kind of bring them out and see if they fit? How does that work?
Yes, I think is what you would consider a style. When you hear a band and a new song that you don't know was from that band, but you recognize it because it sounds like them, and you recognize. So you kind of go, "Oh, right, this is that band," even though I never heard the song. So there is a style in the things you do, and interestingly, obviously, I am now a certain age, and I recognize that some of my approaches to solve the issues of how to represent a fight on a tabletop, I have my own ideas of what is better and what is not as good, but obviously these are just my opinion, and other people will have different opinion. So I tend to go for a certain type of solution. Some other people will go for a different type of solution. So I guess, yes, I have a battery of things that I think work, and I try to bring to the game. One very interesting thing that happened recently as well as a consultant is that I got involved into an art project, which I never had nothing to do with art before, right? In terms of, I tend to work on commercial products that are designed to be sold commercially. Well, actually, I was approached by the American Vicarious, which is a non-for-profit organization which does plays, kind of like theater productions, which tend to be very socially engaged, and they tend to have very difficult conversations. The whole reason for the existence of the American Vicarious is to encourage dialogue between different parties. Like their first, one of the first works was about the race equality in the U.S. Through the rights process and movement, and basically, I've seen this work after they contacted me because they wanted to do a new production which is based on the January the 6th, the event on the Capitol, and so they were like, "Oh, we like to make this arts installation which is interactive, and the public, because there's a lot of interactive things in the things they do. So it's interactive. People come there, the audience needs to play the game, and we're recreating the whole day with the protesters on one side, police on the other side, and played as a war game, and then a different game depending on what happens inside the Capitol." So something like that was completely out of my comfort zone. I was like,
well, let's just pause that. Let's just pause that there and fill out a little bit in the background because it's important to kind of like frame it.
Actual installation is called Fight for America,
and so it's a role playing experience based on the January 6th insurrection of the handover of power after the American election. Correct. I still don't quite know how I feel, but also I understand that it doesn't really matter how I feel. So when they approached you about this, how did you feel about being involved in something like this?
It was very interesting, very artistic, very outside my comfort zone. Designing something that is not a product, that is not to be sold as a product, but is art for a reason. For, in this case, to encourage people that, like you use the word insurrection, and that's interesting because one side of
exactly.
Say that the blue team will call it an insurrection, while the red team would call it a demonstration, like a peaceful demonstration that somehow was diverted into something different. And
it's a very important point. Yeah,
Yeah, there's very, very different viewpoints on what that day was and what happened during that day. And we might have our bias. We may think, oh, I think it was this, or I think it was that. But the whole point of the American Vicarious is to encourage people that see it as a different thing to talk to one another, to speak with one another, to debate, acknowledging that they disagree, but not hating each other, not shooting each other, not fighting with one another, but talking to one another. Because I think the way they convinced me to work on this was definitely to say, this is not taking a side, this is presenting both sides and encouraging to talk to the other side and humanizing both sides, saying, these are people, on both sides are people, and both people think they're doing the right thing.
Yeah,
they're not doing, oh, we're doing this because we're evil. They all think, no, we are doing the right thing. Both sides are thinking that. So if they talk to one another,
it's really important to note that. It's really important to note that my friends, when I mentioned that we were going to talk, my friend kind of said, hey, have you seen this? And he kind of sent me an article across. And before, and I was like, what is it about? And he kind of highlighted what it was about, and I instantly had some feelings. But that it's very, very important to note in the day and age that we live with social media and biases, as mentioned, like even just the use of a word in insurrection, is really, really important to try and detach that. I don't think we ever really truly can, but detach as many preconceived ideas or prejudice that we might have before we go into things. And so I really enjoy hearing you talk about that, and I really enjoy the fact that you're involved in this, because even before you start talking about the game, it's something that you were willing to do. It was something that you were willing to engage with, and it's something that's really important. And I think maybe, will you tell me have you had feedback from this? Have you had people that have spoken to you about this, and what feedback have you got from your involvement in this?
I mean, the art installation is not started yet. It will start in June. It premieres in London, actually, in June. Then it will be New York, and then other places in the US. But the idea is the feelings. You're asking about my feelings. Well, obviously, out of my comfort zone, because it's art instead of a product, a game product that needs to be bought and sold. And dealing with very raw, very current political things is kind of, again, out of your comfort zone, because it's like, oh, maybe I shouldn't. We're kind of saying, well, let's not talk about this stuff, because if you talk about it with somebody who disagrees with you, often you're kind of like, would this lead to conflict? And it's about that, trying to go, well, it doesn't need to lead to conflict. It could lead to a conversation where we try to understand each other's points of view, which is something that I try to do with people that I know and disagree with me on matters like that. Brexit for me is a classic thing where I often disagree with people, and I like to talk to people about it and try to hear the reasons and stuff, because sometimes you find that, again, is that humanizing factor of, you tend to demonize the people that think differently from you. They're evil, they're ignorant, they don't understand, whatever. And you kind of go, well, maybe you don't understand why they think that way. Let's talk about it. So
I was talking to a friend about it, and he talked about we talked about it and said, in some ways it's more important that something like this is done quite quickly, because he was arguing, saying, well, if it was 20 years in the future, it'd be a lot more acceptable. And I said, well, why? And we unpicked that for a while, and it's like, well, because no one will care as much about it, because there's lots of other things that have happened in that 20 years. And also it's like, you mentioned that word raw, and so I was like, probably in this instance and in other instances, it's probably really important to do it as quickly as possible, so that while it's still relevant, while it's still fresh, so people can take that time to think. And if we think about any conflict or any war, you think about back into the Roman Empire, the Mongols, World War II, World War I. There was lots of different things that were happening that could be perceived both positive and negative by the people that were involved, like the actors involved, right? So would you kind of say that maybe talking about this from June is actually important, so that people are able to have those conversations. And it's a certain amount of compassion in this project, I think, where you're assigned a role within one of the different sides, and you have to try and reach their aims regardless of what you think might be right, if that makes sense. And maybe playing a role which is contrary to what your initial belief is more important, to try and have, I wouldn't say empathy wouldn't go that far in terms of feeling what those other people felt or feel or believe, but maybe compassion with that amount that you can kind of maybe understand their motives and understand what they were trying to do a little bit more. Maybe talking about it now while it's still quite raw, as you mentioned, is something that's quite important. What do you think about that?
I think so. In terms of an artistic project, it's very different if you're doing a commercial product. Yes. Because again, for example, with Bolt Action, it was often how do you portray the difference between the various nations that are fighting, and you got Germans, Japanese, Italian on the Axis side, and the British, the Soviets, and the Americans. And you kind of go, you obviously think like leaning into stereotypes is the funny thing to do, is the entertaining thing to do, but obviously if you lean too much into stereotypes, then you risk offending people, because of course stereotypes are just that, stereotypes. Well, most of the soldiers that were involved were pretty much same guy, a guy that was there and kind of was scared and wanted to go back to his family, right? Most of the people there. So where to draw that line for something that you need then to sell is very different from this art piece, which is designed to create a dialogue, create a conversation, to put you in an uncomfortable place, and kind of go, all right, I need to, if I want to engage with this thing, I will have to be put into an uncomfortable place and talk to people that have different opinions, and and try to be civil and talk to these people, not don't go, oh, these are all bad guys and we're the good guys, because both sides think they're the good guys, right? So it's trying to understand what maybe the other guys are not all necessarily bad guys. They may have just slightly different, or very different opinions. And it's finding the man in the bad guy on the other side, kind of thing.
Interesting. So you mentioned June in London. So are you going to be in attendance? Are you going to show up? Are you going to get involved?
I certainly will pop up to see for sure. Don't know exactly when, but I will be there for sure. Yeah, absolutely. Because I don't have to use an airplane. See, as long as there's no airplanes involved, I'm okay. I really don't like flying, so I can just drive to London. I think one thing that derailed this completely to a completely different direction is actually when I said, commercial things. I was thinking of the very, very commercial thing that I'm working on at the moment that we haven't mentioned, that I feel like is probably the thing I'm most excited about. Yes, that Mantic Games are the company that bought River Horse. Yes. And because we worked with them many, many years, Rodney, the owner, is a friend, I like to say, and we work very closely together from the times of Games Workshop to now. And so, as well as the Labyrinth and Dark Crystal licenses, the one license that was River Horse and was transferred to Mantic is the Ghost in the Shell license. Nice. And for me, Ghost in the Shell is, in terms of sci-fi, is one of my favorite things ever, possibly. So being able to work on that, we're writing an RPG, and to start with, and if the RPG goes well, then who knows? We could do role-play games, we could do miniatures games and board games and all sort of things. So working on this project at the moment is super, 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 super exciting, and nice. Recently they just announced there's a new anime coming up next year at the same time as the RPG. So, I'm really in the zone for this one. I really can't wait for it to come out.
So that's something you probably liked as a kid, right? And I know that you've got a fondness for Japan as a country as well. So how has that been for kind of like the things that you maybe appreciate and liked in the background, and a country and a culture that you're interested in, the anime side of things? How has that been? What have been your favorite parts of that?
Yes, I've always been total geek as far as Japan is concerned. The culture, the anime, the manga, it's fascinating culture. And indeed, like you say, I'm very close to it in the sense that I married a Japanese person, and so my family is now half Japanese. Half of my family is Japanese. So now, definitely, very much into all aspects of Japanese culture. Ghost in the Shell, in particular, was a manga, first of all, that I read avidly. I was a teen, kind of almost 20 really when it came out, in Italy at least, and then obviously I watched everything, read everything that's been made. It's a setting that I think is beautifully done, and I would say probably inspired a lot of the cyberpunk stuff that we see these days. Is one of those seminal pieces. I mean, like, Tolkien for fantasy. I think this for cyberpunk is pretty much at the start of it.
Yeah. So you mentioned how it's an RPG. So what's your idea, your brief, your mentality, and maybe some of the feelings that you'd like people to have whilst they're playing this? Have you got like a kind of ideas board or mood board in terms of what you want people to feel while they're playing?
Well, the core of it is bizarrely, I mean, considering it's something that was written in the late 80s, early 90s, it is insanely modern from the point of view that is about AI becoming sentient, becoming self-aware. Is that, what's the difference between artificial intelligence and non-artificial intelligence? Is there a difference? Once something is aware and self-aware and alive, as we should say, would that be? Does he have rights? Does he have human rights? Because, or does he have, that kind of question started with Cyberpunk, with Asimov, even before that. The laws of robotics and all of that. So that thing is now so incredibly, modern now. It's like we are there, right? What are the pros and cons of AI, robotization, cyberization? So it's made it very, very relevant. And I find the characters very, very cool, very exciting, very well developed. The major, Motoko Kusanagi, is an amazing character. I think he's one of the most popular characters in animation and manga. So we have a lot to play with, and a lot to share.
Sometimes when you get involved in an IP, especially one that you love, you potentially get access to things that you might not have had access to before, maybe stills from a movie or scripts and things like that. So is there anything in terms of Ghost in the Shell that you've had access to now you've been involved in this project that you didn't before, or not?
Well, you hit it on absolutely on the nail. For me, one of the things is like, because we are doing some obviously working with the publisher Kodansha that published the comic, we need to have our stuff approved, not just by Kodansha, but actually by Shiro Masamune, the author. And which means that, though indirectly, we are interacting with a guy that I kind of worship as oh my god, it's him. I'm interacting with Shiro Masamune. And there was we're designing some miniatures, and I had feedback directly from the author about a miniature of the Major, Motoko Kusanagi, and it was about her hair. And to kind of render what he meant about the hair, he did a little sketch on the thing, saying a bit more like this. So, but when me and the sculptor, we're both very keen fans, we saw this thing with a sketch hand drawn by the author of the manga. We were like two little kids, kind of going, woo, woo.
Yeah. Whose wall is it on? It's mine. I'm going to take this.
It was amazing. You were like, oh my god, an authentic sketch by Masamune Shiro.
Yeah, that's
it was
awesome.
Great.
It's amazing to have those moments, isn't it? And I really enjoy listening to you because you have a number of those moments. You mentioned about being a geek or a nerd, and it's like kind of like you're a kid in a candy store when you talk about this. And it's really amazing. And it's really endearing to hear because I get that excited about my work, and it's great to hear that you're as excited about it, as a lot of other people that read that. That's awesome, man. That's really, really cool. And so you mentioned that the RPG might potentially just be a springboard into different other areas. So when can we potentially get our hands on the RPG? And is it
the plan is next year, but of course, or maybe even late this year. The thing is, of course, working with Japanese companies, they're very thorough in their approval process and very protective of the IP, rightly so. And so the process is long, so it takes time to get approvals and stuff. But touch wood, late this year, more likely next year, I think there should be I don't know if it's going to be crowdfunded or not. Probably yes, but hopefully a year. Hopefully within a year, it should exist.
Awesome. Right, well, I don't want to take up any more of your time because I'm pretty sure you got work to do and exciting products to be developing and bringing our way. But it's been great to talk to you again, Alessio, and thank you so much for spending some time. I know that you're a very busy guy, and taking an hour out of your regular working day is something that we all appreciate and we really value. So thanks a lot for that, and we hope to speak to you again in the future.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
I don't quite know what that was, but anyway, I was waiting for the metronome to finish. You got a metronome. It's got a metronome in the background whenever I start the recording, and the metronome was still going on. I felt it was going on for a long time, so that skewed my usual woo at the end. But anyway, I'll keep it. So that's episode 231 all wrapped up there. I hope that you enjoyed it. It was good. I'm kind of settling back into the rhythm of the pod chat at the moment, which is quite good. Staying chipper about it, trying to make sure that I'm getting interesting people to talk about. I'm just finding that it's hard to delve deeply into stuff into 60 minutes. I felt that I could have spoken to Alessio for another couple of hours, and it kind of felt that we were kind of skating through a few really interesting and deep areas that I'd like to dig around in more, especially the Ghost in the Shell RPG. I would have liked to dig around a little bit more, but maybe we can get them on in the future and we can talk more deeply about that. And if you'd like to hear anything specifically about certain things and certain people, let me know. So if you'd like, to maybe hear from a previous guest and go a little bit deeper into a certain area, let me know on the Discord, Facebook, or whatever you want to do. Because, there's loads of people I'd like to speak to a little bit more, but it's always, good to get that little bit of feedback and stuff. Hobby stuff, what's going on? I've finished my Kingsmen. I think I mentioned last week that I was doing some Baratheon Kingsmen. The great swords, by the way, they're not bastard swords. They're great swords, officially named on their unit card. They are great swords. One thing that's really good about A Song of Ice and Fire, I'm not sure if I've mentioned this. I mentioned it in a couple of areas, but maybe not on the podcast, is that one of the really good things about the unit cards in A Song of Ice and Fire is they don't always mention their weapons that they use on it. So if you've, type in A Song of Ice and Fire unit cards on the internet search engine of your choice. But what you can do is you can have a look, and some of them are really funny. So all of the units have a unit card, and they have weapons that they attack with, but it's not always just a case of Warhammer or longsword. Some of the things that they use to attack you are pretty good. So for example, the Lannisters, they have a unit that attack you with Lannister oppression. So they don't just necessarily attack you with a sword, they attack you with Lannister oppression. There's quite a few of them that are pretty funny, actually. So take some time to kind of look through the unit cards, and they're pretty good. And I think that leaves it open to, and I'd love to see a war game that kind of leans into that, probably like a Moonstone kind of thing, something that's a little bit whimsical or something that's a little bit silly, just trying to attack somebody with something. I think attacking someone with oppression is pretty good. But anyway, I'm rambling, but that is what the post-ramble is for. So I finished my 3 units of Baratheon Kingsmen. This week I'm moving on to 3 units of Baratheon Queensmen. So they have got swords and shields, so I'm excited about that. That's a big chunk of Baratheons that I've done so far. I think, they're not amazing standard. I could definitely push them further. They're just your basic priming, base coat, wash, base coat back over, and a little bit of the highlight, but they work from a tabletop. They look pretty good, and it's quite nice to be chunking through. I think I mentioned before as well that I've been listening to the Lord of the Rings audiobook whilst I've been doing that, the Andy Serkis narration. So Andy Serkis has been narrating that, and that's been a really good experience. I had a free Audible subscription a while ago, and I downloaded just the longest books, I think, because I'm such a cheapskate. I was like just downloading the cheapest books. Sorry, not the cheapest book, the longest book, so I could get the most out of my Audible credits. So I did that. So I've listened to the Lord of the Rings Andy Serkis narration, which has been fantastic. But anyway, I'd like to know what you're up to. I'd like to know what you're painting. I'd like to know what you listen to whilst you are painting at your painting table, audiobooks. If you've got any good recommendations for anything, please let me know. Hopefully get my Queen's Men done over the next week or two. I've got a nice week off coming up soon. I'm not doing anything, so hopefully get some decent hobby time there. But I think that's it. Until next time we're together, keep painting.